questions. Number one, does the Minister acknowledge the urgency of addressing violence against First Nations, Inuit and Métis women?
The Honourable Minister.
Indeed, Mr. Chair, that is why Economic Action Plan 2013 announced funding of $24 million over 2 years for the Family Violence Prevention Program, allowing my department to continue its programming at a funding level of approximately $30 million in 2013-14 and 2014-15. This investment contributes to enhance safety and security of unreserved residents, particularly women and children.
The Honourable Member for Churchill.
Does the Minister acknowledge the tragedy of over 582 missing and murdered Aboriginal women?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, absolutely, and that is why we are taking concrete action by investing $25 million over 5 years to address the issue of missing and murdered Aboriginal women in Canada. Funding is also provided for shelters and violence prevention programming on reserve, and this should attest to the Honourable Member our concern about the issue.
The Honourable Member for Churchill.
If the Minister and his government are so concerned, will they commit to a national inquiry into missing and murdered Aboriginal women? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
If the concern of the Honourable Member is such, maybe she could extend it to the matrimonial property rights of women, which we are trying to implement in Canada, to try to fill a gap of over 25 years where women living on reserve are denied a basic right which the NDP oppose.
The Honourable Member for Churchill.
Mr. Chair, I would ask the respect for the Minister to for the Minister to respect the rules and keep his answers to the same as the timing of the questions. And my question is, will the Minister commit to a national inquiry into missing and murdered Aboriginal women? Yes or no?
This House has decided to create a special committee to look at the issue. The government has endorsed the motion, and as I understand, the work is currently taking place to look at this issue, and I'm sure that we can trust the members of Parliament to do an excellent job in their mandate.
The Honourable Member for Churchill.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to acknowledge that that question was not answered, and certainly families and organizations like the Native Women's Association of Canada would like to know that answer directly from the Minister. Which department takes the lead role in coordinating the federal government response to violence against Aboriginal women?
The Honourable Minister.
This is a whole of government concern, Mr. Chair. Many departments, several departments, are concerned about this issue and work together with First Nations, with stakeholders all across Canada to try to address this important issue.
The Honourable Member for Churchill.
And again, which department is taking the lead?
Honourable Minister.
The lead over the inquiry is taken by the Department of Justice, and it is assisted ably, I might add, by a host of other departments.
The Honourable Member for Churchill.
Many recommendations in the UN Universal Periodic Review of Canada draft report ask that Canada develop a national action plan to address violence against Aboriginal women. Will the Minister commit to a national action plan?
The Honourable Minister.
Will the Honourable Member respect the will of this House and let the special committee do its work, do its recommendation, and then allow the government to analyze those and take the proper steps that have to be taken?
The Honourable Member for Churchill.
Will the Minister use the power that he has in his role to listen to what emerged from the UN Periodic Review and commit to a national action plan, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, it is important, I believe, that we respect the will of the House, who has appointed a special committee to look into this issue. We shall let the committee do its work, listen to witnesses, to stakeholders, and then get the recommendations of the committee, which I can assure the Honourable Member the government will consider diligently.
The Honourable Member for Churchill.
Does the department have benchmarks to measure progress on preventing violence against women?
The Honourable Minister.
The issue of violence against women, as I have indicated, is a serious concern. Ending violence against Aboriginal women is a priority for our government, and it is a shared responsibility, Mr. Chair, of not only the federal government, but provincial, territorial government, and also civil society.
The honourable member for Churchill.
If it's such a priority, how much funding is specifically set aside by the department to address violence against Aboriginal women?
The honourable minister.
Action Plan 2013 announced funding of $24 million over 2 years for the Family Violence Prevention Program, allowing my department to continue to offer its programming at a funding level of approximately $30 million in 2013-14. And another thing that could help these women and these children would be the adoption of S2, the bill that tries to fill a gap that had existed in this country for too long.
Chill.
Going to northern and remote communities.
The honourable minister.
I didn't understand the question.
Because his colleague was clapping too loud. How much of that money is allocated for northern and remote communities?
Poor baby. The $30 million program that will be spended in 2013-14 will be for the benefit of all First Nations all across Canada.
The honourable member for Churchill.
How does the funding for emergency shelters on reserve compare to funding for those off reserve?
The honourable minister.
We have invested into about 41 shelters that exist all over the country, Mr. Chair, and this network of 41 shelters, which has grown from 35 about a few years ago, has grown, as I said, from 35 in a few years ago to 41 as a result of the construction of 5 new shelters and the addition of an existing shelter in the Atlantic region to the list of department-funded shelters.
Honourable member for Churchill.
Is the minister saying that out of 633 First Nations, only 41 First Nations have emergency shelters on reserve?
The honourable minister.
Approximately 329 First Nation communities are served by these shelters. And in 2010-11, this is approximately 3,143 women and 2,890 children accessed family violence shelters, and 270 proposal-based prevention projects were supported throughout Canada.
Honourable member for Churchill.
How many of these shelters are operating at full capacity?
The honourable minister.
That some are operating at full capacity, others at less than full capacity. What is important is that the investment that has been made this year, again, will ensure that these programs can continue throughout Canada.
The honourable member for Churchill.
Out of these 41 shelters, how many are at full capacity?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Chair, as I indicated, these shelters are there to meet the demand as it comes. Some are at full capacity indeed. Others are at less than full capacity. And the important thing is that these shelters are there in place to serve indeed these 229 First Nation communities across Canada.
Honourable member.
Clearly no real answers there, so let's move on to another question. How many does the minister acknowledge the disproportionate number of Aboriginal women in prisons? In fact, does he know what percentage of women in prisons are Aboriginal?
Honourable minister.
Mr. Chair, I do not have the exact number of Aboriginal women in prison. I'm sure that the Minister of Public Safety would be able to answer her question.
The honourable member for Churchill.
The percentage of Aboriginal women in prison is 33%. How is this government addressing the number of Aboriginal women, over-representation of Aboriginal women in prisons?
The Honourable Minister.
Not only is this a matter for the provincial, the Federal Minister of Public Safety, but as I said earlier, Mr. Chair, the problem of women in those circumstances is a shared responsibility of not only the federal but also the provincial and territorial governments and indeed civil society.
The Honourable Member.
What percentage of funding for Aboriginal economic development is going to women and or organizations that serve and employ Aboriginal women?
The Honourable Minister.
The department has an economic development program which is in place and which benefits without gender regards all First Nation members all across Canada.
Honourable Member.
Mr. Chair, we know that Aboriginal women are often live in greater poverty than Aboriginal men. The question is, in the Aboriginal Economic Development Program, what percentage of the funding is focused on engaging women in the workplace, or is there no focus on employing and training Aboriginal women?
Honourable Minister.
I know for a fact, Mr. Chair, that my colleague, the Minister in charge of the status of women, also the Minister of Health, and our department are working together to address that particular situation. And there are programs indeed in place which are not, they are gender neutral, but efforts are being made to work with these stakeholders, with these groups, in order to improve their employability. And that's why I think that the NDP should revise its position to oppose the measures that will lead to better skills training of these youth, these young girls and women all throughout First Nations in Canada.
Honourable Member for Churchill.
How does the federal government plan to address the need for increases to officer complements in First Nation police forces and for proper training for these officers and proper equipment so that they can do their job effectively, efficiently and safely?
The Honourable Minister.
I thought she was going to congratulate the government for the announcement that by the Minister of Public Safety that long-term, sustainable, predictable funding will be has been committed to provide those services on First Nations all across Canada.
The Honourable Member.
When will the First Nations Police Program be updated to address the current situation facing First Nations police services and include resources for housing and infrastructure?
The Honourable Minister.
The fact of the matter, as I just said, is that the government has recently announced long-term, sustainable, predictable funding to help First Nation police the First Nation lands, and I think and I believe, Mr. Chair, that we can trust these professionals to do their job to the best, not only of their ability, but they know the terrain really well, and I trust that they can discharge that responsibility.
Honourable Member.
Is the minister saying that all First Nations that have pointed to the deficiency in policing funding are okay with the funding announcement, or are there still First Nations that require and have asked for federal funding for the police service?
Mr. Chair, this honourable member should know by now that this government remains focused on 4 priorities. I mean, they are, and they've been outlined by the Prime Minister many times. Canadians, and these are priorities that Canadians care most about. First, their families. Second, the safety of our street and communities, and that doesn't stop at the door of First Nation. They are included, and their pride in being a Canadian citizen, a citizen of this country, plus, of course, their personal financial security.
Honourable member has 1 minute left of her time.
I'd ask the minister to hear the calls from the Garden Hill First Nation regarding policing. The department completely eliminated the funding envelope that provides First Nations and tribal councils with the financial resources to secure legal services. Can the minister explain why this government continues to take actions that stifle the ability of First Nations to advocate and protect their interests?
The Minister has 30 seconds.
Quite to the contrary, this government and this department is working cooperatively with all First Nations all across Canada to improve the situation, the self-sufficiency, and the prospects of all First Nations all across Canada.